We exist in an era of digital certainty, where knowledge is neatly categorized, archived, and dated. The timeline of human civilization, taught in every school across the United States, from the rise of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent to the sophisticated metallurgy of the Bronze Age, is presented not as a theory, but as an undeniable proven fact. Yet what if the foundational premise of our collective historical understanding is fundamentally flawed? What if the monuments we see, the texts we read, and the technological leaps we credit to specific ages are merely footnotes in a much grander and far more terrifying lost history? Imagine for a moment peeling back the layers of established history, not just by centuries, but by millennia. Picture a world where the hunter-gatherer, perpetually portrayed as a primitive survivor, struggling against the elements, was instead a sophisticated architect, astronomer, and stonemason capable of engineering feats that defy our contemporary understanding of Neolithic capabilities. This is not science fiction. This is the quiet, disturbing reality whispered by 7 specific ancient discoveries, pieces of evidence so profound, so utterly out of place, that they force a total re-evaluation of the human story. They are relics of a past that simply should not exist. The confrontation begins in southeastern Turkey, on a desolate hilltop known as Göbekli Tepe. Before its discovery, the prevailing historical consensus held that complex social structures, monumental architecture, and organized religion were direct byproducts of settled agriculture. Necessity, they argued, drove innovation. You farm first, then you build temples. It's a clean, linear progression, a comfortable narrative for the intellectual elite. Then came Göbekli Tepe. The site, first excavated rigorously by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt in the mid-1990s, presented an immediate, insurmountable challenge to that tidy historical timeline. What Schmidt and his team uncovered were massive, meticulously carved limestone pillars, some reaching up to 20 feet high and weighing upwards of 20 tons, arranged in perfectly circular enclosures. These weren't random stones. They were stylized, T-shaped megaliths, some featuring intricate, detailed carvings of animals: boars, foxes, lions, birds of prey. The craftsmanship was stunning, yet the dating was catastrophic for established history. Radiocarbon dating placed the construction of the oldest layers of Göbekli Tepe deep into the pre-pottery Neolithic A period, around 9600 BCE. That date is staggeringly old. It predates the widespread practice of agriculture, the very invention believed necessary to support such massive communal labor, by thousands of years. It predates Stonehenge by roughly 6,000 years, and the pyramids of Giza by nearly 7,000 years. To grasp the magnitude of this temporal displacement, consider the accepted reality of 9600 BCE. In the accepted narrative, the human population was small, nomadic, and focused solely on daily survival. They lived in transient camps, utilizing basic stone tools, their cultural expression limited to simple cave paintings. The idea that these people, these purported hunter-gatherers, could conceive, organize, quarry, transport, carve, and erect structures of this complexity requires a level of social cohesion, specialized labor, and abstract thought that academia had reserved for civilizations thousands of years later. The implications are breathtaking and destabilizing. If these people were still primarily hunter-gatherers, what compelled them to build such an elaborate, monumental, religious complex? Schmidt himself proposed a revolutionary idea. Perhaps the temple, the shared spiritual need, came first. Perhaps the necessity of feeding the vast workforce required to build and maintain Göbekli Tepe led to the invention of agriculture, overturning the causal chain of civilization entirely. The air around Göbekli Tepe, even today, carries a dry, ancient weight. The sun beats down mercilessly on the excavated circles, highlighting the precise, deliberate joints between the stones. It's a testament to planning, geometry, and a sophisticated cosmology that we can only vaguely interpret. The T-pillars themselves are generally accepted to represent stylized human forms, perhaps deities or ancestors, staring out at a landscape that was once lush and vital, now echoing with silence. Think about the sheer force of will required. How did they move 20-ton stones without the wheel, without domesticated draft animals, and without sophisticated metallic tools? The established answers, sledges, manpower, and pure grit, feel profoundly inadequate when faced with the sheer scale of the undertaking. This wasn't a seasonal project. It was a sustained, generations-long effort indicating a settled belief system far more complex than any we attributed to that epoch. The biggest mystery, however, is not how they built it, but why they buried it. Sometime around 8000 BCE, the entire site, after centuries of use, was deliberately, painstakingly backfilled with earth, sand, and rubble. It wasn't abandoned, it was entombed, preserved for a distant future. Why would a culture invest so much effort into a monumental structure, only to invest equal effort into concealing it? Was it fear, reverence, or perhaps a cultural reset, an attempt to erase a memory too overwhelming or dangerous to maintain? The discovery of Göbekli Tepe did not just add a chapter to history, it necessitated tearing out the first several hundred pages of the textbook. This single site, sitting isolated on a Turkish hill, represents the first of the 7 ancient discoveries that fundamentally shatter what we thought we knew. It introduces a concept that established academics struggled desperately to contain. The idea of lost precursor civilizations, societies sophisticated enough to leave a profound mark, yet swept away by some cataclysm, leaving only fragments we can't rationally place. We are forced to ask, what else did they know? What other secrets are buried beneath the consensus? The discomfort Göbekli Tepe causes is palpable in archaeological circles. A polite resistance to acknowledging the full scope of its implications, often framed as an isolated anomaly rather than proof of a pattern. But as we move forward through the remaining 6 discoveries, that pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The anomalies pile up, like impossibly heavy stones in the landscape of time. The weight of this ancient construction bears down on us. The silence around those towering, stylized figures seems to demand an answer we are not yet prepared to give. They represent a cultural blossoming at a time when we insisted humanity was still in its infancy, barely surviving the last throes of the Ice Age. The meticulous planning, the artistic expression, the sheer organizational capacity, it all points to a level of societal development that history books reserve for Sumer or Egypt millennia later. The narrative has cracked, the foundation is shaking. The sheer scale of the pillars, quarried from a distance and brought up the hill, speaks volumes not just of engineering, but of shared purpose. Imagine the discussions, the rituals, the generational commitment required to sustain such a massive undertaking without the perceived benefits of surplus farming or centralized monarchical power. They built this not for a king, but seemingly for the gods, or perhaps for themselves. A communal expression of spirituality that preceded all conventional notions of organized government. If this profound architecture existed 11,600 years ago, what else was happening globally? If the Fertile Crescent wasn't the origin of civilization, but merely a re-emergence after some massive disruption, then the entire chronological map of human history needs to be redrawn. We're not looking at the start of settled life, but perhaps the middle or even the end of a forgotten epoch. This initial discovery is the critical point of departure. The moment we move from comfortable certainty into unsettling speculation. The academic community's reaction is a study in human inertia. To accept Göbekli Tepe fully means rewriting grant proposals, discarding decades of published work and admitting that the fundamental models taught in universities worldwide are incomplete, perhaps dangerously so. This resistance is powerful, cloaked in careful language and demands for more data. But the stone is there, unmoving, undeniable. It stands as a silent sentinel to a complexity we refuse to acknowledge. Consider the details. The floors of the enclosures were constructed using terrazzo-like material, a technique typically associated with later Roman architecture. The T-pillars are not merely rough blocks, they show evidence of skilled dressing and polishing. This suggests not just utility, but aesthetics, a deep respect for the materials and the finished product. This single site forces us to confront the possibility that advanced knowledge doesn't always progress linearly. Sometimes it peaks, crashes, and then must begin the slow climb again. If this beginning already made you reconsider what you knew, imagine what lies ahead. Se esse começo já te fez repensar o que sabia, imagina o que vem pela frente. Então, já deixa seu like e se inscreve no canal, porque aqui, cada vídeo revela algo que poucos têm coragem de mostrar. The fear that Göbekli Tepe instills in the established historical framework is the fear of chronological nihilism. If the oldest known organized temple is 11,600 years old, what prevents something similar from existing 20,000 years ago, or 50,000? We have dated the dawn of true civilization arbitrarily based on the earliest evidence we expected to find. Göbekli Tepe proves that our expectations were dramatically low. Think about the sheer manpower, the administrative effort, the provisioning logistics required to feed the hundreds, perhaps thousands of workers over the decades necessary to construct this monumental site. This speaks of a sophisticated system of resource management, even if they hadn't formalized agriculture yet. Perhaps they relied on sophisticated management of wild grain resources or seasonal hunting patterns organized on an industrial scale. The complexity implies management, and management implies societal hierarchy and specialized roles. Things we were taught only arose after settled farming created surplus wealth. The feeling when standing among these stones, knowing their age, is not one of reverence for a primitive past, but rather a chilling realization of how much time we have lost track of. It's a heavy silence, broken only by the wind whistling past the stone carvings, a wind that has seen the rise and fall of countless epochs since these pillars were first erected. The stories carved into the stone, the predatory animals, the symbolic representations, speak of a rich mythological landscape, a deep connection to the natural world, perhaps an attempt to control or appease forces they did not understand. But they also speak of a mastery of materials and logistics that defies the standard narrative of their time. The implications ripple outward, affecting everything from anthropological dating methods to our understanding of the origin of language and mathematics. If complex geometry was employed here, then the origins of mathematical thought must be pushed back drastically. If complex religious narratives were being depicted, then abstract language and symbolism were highly developed. It is a domino effect of historical revisionism, all triggered by one lonely, magnificent hilltop. The meticulous burial of the site also suggests foresight. They didn't just walk away, they intentionally covered their work, suggesting a plan for preservation or concealment. Who were they protecting it from? Or were they protecting the future from the knowledge contained within? This act of deliberate burial is perhaps the most tantalizing clue, suggesting a culture aware of its own demise or transformation, planning for a legacy that would remain silent for millennia. This profound mystery, this colossal disruption, sets the stage for the next series of historical challenges. If civilization was older and more sophisticated than we believed, what technologies might they have possessed? What knowledge did they master, only to lose? The questions Göbekli Tepe introduces are logistical, theological, and chronological, but most importantly, they are existential. They challenge our modern arrogance in believing we are the pinnacle of human achievement. We are simply the current iteration, recovering from a historical amnesia whose scale we are only beginning to comprehend. The next discovery takes us from monumental architecture to startlingly advanced technology, forcing us to consider if electrical knowledge was far less a 19th century invention than a forgotten art. If Göbekli Tepe shattered our understanding of when civilization began, the next cluster of discoveries challenges what ancient civilizations were capable of achieving. We shift the setting dramatically from the desolate plains of Neolithic Turkey to the scorching heat and historical depth of Mesopotamia, the traditional cradle of civilization. This is where, in the 1930s, something startlingly modern was unearthed near Baghdad, the Baghdad Battery. The discovery itself was almost accidental, a detail overlooked in the vast catalogue of artifacts recovered by German archaeologist Wilhelm König. Inside the National Museum of Iraq archives, König encountered a specific set of items, a small, seemingly mundane clay jar, roughly 6 inches high, containing a cylinder made of copper sheeting. Inside the copper cylinder was an iron rod. The top of the rod was isolated from the copper by an asphalt plug, effectively creating an insulated, sealed unit. König, an engineer as well as an archaeologist, recognized the unmistakable structure immediately. Despite the objects being dated to the Parthian era, roughly 150 BCE to 250 CE, a time known for its military strategy, not electrical engineering, König proposed a radical, almost heretical theory. This arrangement was not a storage jar or a ritualistic vessel, but a rudimentary electrochemical cell, or more simply, a battery. To function as a battery, the vessel needed an electrolyte, an acidic solution to react with the copper and iron electrodes. Historical context provides several easy candidates: grape juice, vinegar, or even wine, all readily available in ancient Mesopotamia. Modern experiments replicating the Baghdad Battery precisely have confirmed König's hypothesis. When filled with an electrolyte, the device generates a measurable, albeit small, electrical current, typically ranging from 0.8 to 1.5 volts. The implications are massive. If this was indeed a functioning battery, it means knowledge of electrical generation existed thousands of years before figures like Alessandro Volta or Michael Faraday. This throws a wrench into the tidy, linear history of science that places the discovery of electricity firmly in the Age of Enlightenment. The question isn't just how they built it, but why? What was the purpose of a small, low-voltage power source in a society that ostensibly relied on oil lamps and manual labor? Established academics predictably resist the electrical theory fiercely. They offer alternative explanations. The vessel was used for storing sacred scrolls, though no residue supports this. Or perhaps it was utilized for specific alchemical or medicinal purposes unrelated to power generation. The most common alternative theory suggests it was used for electroplating, the process of using electricity to deposit a thin layer of one metal onto another, typically gold or silver, onto less valuable metals like copper. If the Baghdad Battery was used for electroplating, the level of sophistication required in the metallurgical arts must be drastically higher than previously accepted for the Parthian period. Electroplating demands precise control over voltage, current, and the electrolyte solution. It's an advanced chemical process. If this was the case, it suggests a specialized craft, perhaps held secret by guilds or priests, that mastered subtle forms of energy manipulation. Imagine the awe of the common person encountering objects plated with brilliant, unfading gold, created by an unseen force. But even the electroplating theory, while less radical than suggesting they were powering ancient lamps, still challenges the standard timeline of technological mastery. It demands that we acknowledge a lost, practical application of electricity in the ancient world. The sensation of touching a replica of the Baghdad battery is peculiar. It looks utterly innocuous, a simple piece of pottery. Yet within its fragile confines lies the potential for electrical energy, a silent testament to a forgotten skill. The iron rod, likely corroded and oxidized over millennia, speaks of chemical reactions harnessed intentionally. The careful asphalt seals suggest an understanding of insulation and preservation of the chemical environment. The inherent difficulty in classifying the Baghdad battery lies in its isolation. No explicit textual records from the Parthian era describe its use, nor have vast fields of similar batteries been uncovered. But should a lack of mass-produced evidence negate the existence of the technology itself? If a single iPhone were found by archaeologists 5,000 years from now, would they assume all 21st century civilization was devoid of electronic communication simply because they couldn't find the central server farms? The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, a dictum that becomes increasingly important when dealing with technological anomalies. This discovery, while small in physical size, carries an enormous conceptual weight. It introduces the theme of technological regression, the concept that humanity has, on multiple occasions, achieved peaks of scientific understanding only to have that knowledge wiped out by societal collapse, war, or cataclysm, forcing future generations to start over from scratch. If the Baghdad battery suggests a lost mastery of simple chemistry and electricity, the next discovery, recovered from a shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in 1900, suggests a lost mastery of precision engineering and advanced mathematics that is simply bewildering. This is the Antikythera mechanism. Imagine a device recovered from the sea, encased in concrete marine buildup, looking initially like a corroded, calcified lump of rock. But when examined with modern X-ray technology, it revealed a breathtaking internal structure, a complex assembly of over 30 intricately meshing bronze gears, differential gears, and dials, all housed in a wooden box the size of a shoebox. The dating of the shipwreck places the mechanism around 150–100 BCE, roughly contemporary with the Baghdad battery. But its complexity far surpasses anything we attribute to that Hellenistic period. The mechanism is, effectively, the world's oldest known analog computer. What did the Antikythera mechanism do? It calculated, not simple addition, but highly complex astronomical cycles with astonishing accuracy. It tracked the movements of the Sun, the Moon, and likely the 5 planets known to the Greeks: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. It predicted eclipses, calculated the dates of ancient athletic games like the Olympics, and tracked the variable speed of the Moon as it orbits Earth, a phenomenon that requires an understanding of elliptical, non-uniform motion. The precision of the gearing is the true scandal. Some of the gears are mere millimeters thick, requiring incredibly sophisticated metallurgy and precision tooling. The gear ratios were complex, including a unique differential gear system, a component traditionally credited to 16th century horologists for its invention. To have this technology existing in 150 BCE is equivalent to finding a working microchip in a Roman mosaic. The historical dissonance is extreme. If the Greeks possessed the mathematical and engineering capability to create a device like this, where is the intellectual lineage? Where are the prototypes, the factory floors, the textbooks on differential gearing? The mechanism seems to appear fully formed, a singular masterpiece without predecessor or successor. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this moved you. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você. Então fortalece esse conteúdo. Curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver isso. The only possible explanation for such a device is that it represents the absolute pinnacle of a highly developed, yet entirely lost intellectual tradition. Thinkers like Archimedes or Hipparchus are often cited as the potential designers, men whose genius was perhaps far greater than their surviving written records suggest. The mechanism demands that we elevate the entire scientific capacity of the Hellenistic world, far above the level we usually afford them. What knowledge was necessary to build this? First, an advanced understanding of trigonometry and geometry. Second, an empirical model of the solar system, sophisticated enough to account for irregularities like the variable speed of the moon. Third, metallurgy capable of casting and shaping minute bronze parts with extreme precision, requiring advanced files, lathes, and perhaps even specific hard alloys. The implications are terrifying. If the Greeks possessed this level of technology, what happened to it? Why did the knowledge vanish so completely that for the next 1,500 years, the peak of European technology remained relatively simple watermills and basic clockwork? The Antikythera mechanism is a stark reminder that knowledge is fragile. It can be easily lost, wiped away by war, plague, or neglect. It stands as a profound marker of technological amnesia, suggesting a massive cultural regression occurred sometime after its creation. Imagine the atmosphere on the small, sinking ship that carried this device. Was the mechanism treated as a sacred object, a tool of power, or simply an expensive status symbol? We can only speculate, but its very existence forces us to confront the limitations of our historical record. The consensus holds that technology marches forward linearly. These anomalies suggest it might be a cyclical pattern of boom and collapse, genius and forgetfulness. The detailed construction of the mechanism is mesmerizing. Each tiny gear, once cleaned of millennia of marine decay, speaks of thousands of hours of painstaking labor. The inscriptions on the bronze cover, detailing the celestial bodies and calendar systems, are themselves a complex intersection of language, mythology, and science. The mechanism wasn't just functional, it was beautiful, an artistic rendition of the cosmos in miniature. This level of dedication to precision and aesthetics elevates the status of the artisans and scientists involved, from mere craftspeople to intellectual giants, operating on a level we usually associate with Renaissance polymaths. The complexity of the differential gears is particularly mind-boggling. This allows the mechanism to calculate the orbital difference between the Sun and Moon, a task that even in the Middle Ages was considered astronomically difficult to do mechanically. The presence of this gear shows a foundational understanding of complex mechanical movement that should not have existed until the 17th century. It's an intellectual ghost in the machine of history. As we move from the monumental architecture of Göbekli Tepe and the simple yet profound electricity of the Baghdad battery to the breathtaking complexity of the Antikythera mechanism, a pattern emerges. These are not isolated quirks. They are evidence of sophisticated, localized, or perhaps globally interconnected pockets of advanced knowledge that thrived and then vanished. The narrative of human history must account for these peaks. We cannot simply dismiss them as singular strokes of genius. They require a supportive educational, economic, and scientific infrastructure. If the Antikythera mechanism was built, then the theoretical physics, mathematics, and metallurgy labs that underpinned its creation must also have existed. Where are they? The silence is deafening, perhaps suggesting a more complete cultural obliteration than we dare to imagine. If the physical remnants of the Baghdad battery and the Antikythera mechanism challenge our timeline for technology, the next discovery challenges our timeline for global exploration and geographical knowledge. We travel now to the Ottoman Empire, to the library of a 16th century admiral whose map poses a riddle that cartographers and historians have failed to solve for centuries: the Piri Reis map. The map was compiled in 1513 by Ahmed Muhiddin Piri, known as Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer. It's a remarkable piece of historical geography drawn on gazelle skin and signed by the admiral himself, who claimed it was based on 20 different source maps, some contemporary, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Initially, the map was celebrated for its accuracy in depicting the coastlines of Western Africa, the Atlantic, and South America, particularly the precise charting of the Brazilian coast, decades before it was officially documented by European explorers. However, the map contains geographical features that should have been impossible for anyone in the early 16th century, or even later, to know existed. The most controversial element of the Piri Reis map is the depiction of a southern landmass, generally interpreted by many analysts, including researchers from the US Navy Hydrographic Office in the 1960s, to be the coastline of Antarctica. But here is the shattering detail. This coastline is depicted without ice. Antarctica, as we know it, was not officially sighted until 1820. Furthermore, the landmass beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, the actual geographical coastline, has been covered by a mile-thick layer of ice for at least 6,000 years, and potentially millions of years. For the Piri Reis map to depict this coastline accurately, including features of the Queen Maud Land region, it suggests that the map's original source material must have been created when that region was free of its massive ice cap. The dating of the last time the Queen Maud Land coastline was ice-free stretches back to at least 4000 BCE, but the more conservative, globally recognized geological consensus places the last significant period of deglaciation much further back, potentially tens of thousands of years ago. The implications here are profound. If Piri Reis's map, compiled from older sources, accurately depicts an ice-free Antarctica, it suggests two possibilities, both revolutionary. One, a civilization existed thousands of years ago, prior to the end of the last major ice age, that possessed the geographical, navigational, and cartographical skills necessary to map the globe on a scale we previously thought was restricted to the 18th or 19th centuries. Two, Piri Reis had access to a vast, lost archive of knowledge, potentially salvaged from ancient Alexandria or other centers of learning, which preserved geographical data from a forgotten epoch. The standard academic resistance to this theory is strong. Critics argue that the depiction is simply a coincidence, a speculative landmass drawn in the style of Terra Australis Incognita, or that the coastline is simply a misrepresentation of the South American continent. Yet detailed analysis, particularly by figures like Charles Hapgood, whose work was endorsed by prominent figures including Albert Einstein, suggested that the projections and geometry of the map were astonishingly accurate, utilizing advanced spherical trigonometry, a technique generally attributed to European cartographers centuries later. Hapgood argued that the maps used by Piri Reis must have originated from a civilization that possessed not only global reach, but also knowledge of non-Euclidean geometry and sophisticated methods for projecting a curved Earth onto a flat plane. Imagine Piri Reis sitting in his library, surrounded by scrolls and fragments, the smell of aged vellum and strong Turkish coffee filling the air. He is diligently copying, connecting disparate pieces of ancient geographical data, piecing together a world map far more accurate than anything his contemporary European rivals possessed. He couldn't possibly comprehend the full meaning of the icy southern shorelines he was drawing, but he copied them faithfully, trusting the accuracy of his predecessors. This reliance on lost sources is the key to the Piri Reis mystery. It implies a historical catastrophe so great that an entire body of global geographical knowledge was nearly extinguished, surviving only in fragmented copies held by scholars and navigators far from the collapsing center of learning. This is the central paradox of these anomalies. They don't just point to lost technology, they point to lost information infrastructure. If a civilization could map Antarctica, they had global communication, observational systems, and a method of preserving and passing on data over vast stretches of time. What does it feel like to hold a fragment of that lost knowledge? The Piri Reis map is fragile, its gazelle skin texture thin and delicate, yet the ideas it contains are explosive, threatening to overturn the very plate tectonics of history. It forces us to ask, if they knew the shape of the world thousands of years ago, what else were they hiding in their maps, charts, and astronomical tables? Did they map the stars differently? Did they understand continental drift? The map's ability to predict details of unexplored coastlines suggests predictive power beyond simple observation, perhaps based on mathematical models of the Earth's shape that were centuries ahead of their time. The accuracy in the relative longitudes is particularly shocking, as determining precise longitude remained a massive challenge for European sailors well into the 18th century. Why do historians fight so fiercely against the obvious conclusions drawn from the Piri Reis map? Because accepting it means accepting the existence of a high culture, perhaps predating the last ice age, a culture that either perished in a global cataclysm, like the rapid melting event often associated with 12,000 years ago, or was intentionally eradicated from the historical record. Such a theory requires acknowledging that everything we call ancient is actually post-cataclysmic recovery. Think about that for a moment. If the accepted timeline is wrong, then the great narratives of Egypt and Sumer might be second attempts, civilizations emerging from the ashes, inheriting fragments of tools and data they no longer fully understood, much like a modern society inheriting the instructions for a steam engine, but forgetting the principles of thermodynamics. The mystery of the ice-free Antarctic coast remains a silent indictment of the historical consensus. It demands a sophisticated precursor civilization capable of global navigation and complex surveying. Existing during a geological epoch we insist was dominated by ice and primitive migration. The pressure is mounting. Göbekli Tepe says civilization is older. The Baghdad Battery and Antikythera say technology was far more advanced. Piri Reis says global knowledge existed. We must now turn our attention to other continents, searching for evidence that confirms this disruptive pattern. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this moved you. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você. Então, fortalece esse conteúdo. Curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver isso. Our historical journey now takes us across the Atlantic, far from the established centers of old world power into the dense, humid jungles of Costa Rica. Here, the challenge to accepted history takes the form of massive, perfectly shaped stone orbs, the Diquis spheres, or more commonly, the Costa Rican stone balls. These spheres, numbering in the hundreds, range in size from tiny baseball-sized stones to colossal orbs weighing over 15 tons and measuring up to 8 feet in diameter. They are remarkable not for their size alone, but for their astounding precision. The indigenous culture that created them, the Diquis culture, flourished primarily between 700 CE and 1530 CE. While this dating is relatively late in the grand scheme of ancient history, the precision of these artifacts challenges the known capabilities of this specific pre-Columbian civilization. What makes the Diquis spheres so significant is their incredible sphericity. Many of the largest balls are geometrically near-perfect, approaching true spheres with an astonishingly low deviation, often less than a few millimeters across the entire surface. Achieving this level of geometric precision requires sophisticated understanding of mathematics and measurement, and a mastery of stoneworking techniques that seem impossible given the tools attributed to the Diquis people: primitive stone tools, rubbing, and localized heating, cooling techniques. Imagine the jungle environment: hot, damp, oppressive. The logistical nightmare of quarrying the raw material, often granodiorite, a very hard, igneous rock, sometimes from sources miles away, and then, with crude instruments, grinding and polishing these huge boulders into near-perfect spheres. The effort required is staggering. suggesting a society that either had a vast, centralized workforce dedicated to this purpose or utilized a method of shaping that we have yet to rediscover. Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding the Diki spheres is their purpose. There are no explicit written records. The Diki's culture lacked a comprehensive writing system detailing their function. Theories abound. Were they astronomical markers used to track constellations or solstices? Were they religious symbols representing the sun or the cosmos? Were they status symbols marking the burial sites of powerful leaders? Or were they, as some radical theories suggest, simply navigational markers or components of a lost large-scale energy grid? The lack of context is frustrating. Many spheres have been moved from their original locations due to construction or treasure hunting, obliterating any chance of archaeological context that might explain their placement or orientation. The ones remaining in situ often seem aligned with certain astronomical features, reinforcing the idea of a calendar or celestial map. The sheer volume of these artifacts, hundreds scattered across a specific, limited region of the Dikis Delta, suggests that their creation was a deeply embedded cultural practice, not a one-off artistic endeavor. They were integral to the society, yet their role remains inscrutable to us. Consider the artisan who labored for months, perhaps years, on a single sphere. The feeling of the rough volcanic stone beneath his hands, slowly yielding to his persistent grinding and polishing. The meticulous measurement, checking the curvature constantly against a perfect reference. This level of dedication speaks to a profound belief in the geometric ideal, a philosophical commitment to perfection that transcends mere functionality. The official explanation for their creation hinges on painstaking, labor-intensive processes, heating the rock to weaken it, then using hard hammerstones, manos, to chip away the excess, followed by prolonged abrasive grinding with sand and water. While this process is technically possible, achieving the documented level of sphericity using only these methods is immensely difficult, bordering on the miraculous, especially for the larger spheres weighing multiple tons. If a society is capable of such geometric precision, it begs the question of what other mathematical knowledge they possessed. Did they understand the concept of pi to a high degree of accuracy? Did they utilize advanced forms of geometry beyond Euclidean principles? The Diki spheres, much like Göbekli Tepe, represent a massive investment of labor into a non-survival necessity. They speak of a society stable enough and organized enough to dedicate significant resources to abstract, philosophical, or religious ends. They are silent testaments to an intellectual peak achieved in isolation, far from the old world's trajectory. The global fascination with perfectly shaped spheres dates back to many cultures, but the sheer quantity and size of the Diki's artifacts make them unique. They are not carvings, they are geometric forms achieved on a colossal scale. The visual impact is striking. Massive, smooth grey orbs sitting in the lush green jungle, seeming impossibly alien. They look less like artifacts and more like intentional planetary markers dropped from the sky. This powerful visual dissonance further fuels the alternative theories that suggest the spheres are too perfect, too numerous, and too isolated in the historical record to be the result of simple grinding by a relatively minor regional culture. Some non-mainstream theories even posit connections to high-energy physics, suggesting the spheres might be residual elements of some form of ancient geothermal or seismic harnessing technology. While speculative, such theories reflect the profound inadequacy of the conventional explanations to account for the sphere's perfection and sheer existence. The spheres challenge our ethnocentric view of technological and intellectual development. We assume that complexity flows only from Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. The Deakin spheres prove that high levels of mathematical and engineering sophistication could arise independently in the American tropics, or perhaps were inherited from the same shadowy precursor civilization referenced by the Piri Reis map. If you also find the sheer perfection of these objects unsettling, comment below with your own theory about their purpose. Was it pure art or lost science? Let's return for a moment to the Antikythera mechanism, which we explored previously. While the Deakin spheres are about macro-perfection, spheres, the Antikythera mechanism is about micro-perfection, gears. But both artifacts raise the same core methodological challenge. The precision required for their creation seems to exceed the capacity of the known tools of their respective periods. Consider the metallurgical requirements for the Antikythera mechanism. The gear teeth had to be perfectly cut and spaced to mesh flawlessly, allowing for the smooth, continuous calculation of astronomical events. The bronze alloy used was highly specialized, likely treated to resist corrosion and wear, demonstrating sophisticated metallurgical control that we usually attribute to much later periods of material science. Furthermore, the mechanism requires an assembly process that implies detailed design blueprints, specialized calibration tools, and possibly a system of standardization for components. Concepts that were revolutionary in the industrial age, let alone 2,000 years ago. The device is not a collection of parts. It is an integrated, finely tuned system, demonstrating an understanding of systems engineering. We are faced with a frustrating historical silence. Where are the workshops? Where are the specialized tools used to create these incredibly fine gears? Were they made of some perishable material, like hardened wood? Or perhaps they were metallic tools that were simply melted down for reuse when the knowledge was lost? The absence of a supporting infrastructure for the Antikythera mechanism is the strongest evidence for the idea of lost knowledge. It suggests a high-tech singularity, a brief period or localized environment where intellectual capability soared only to be extinguished, leaving behind a single, magnificent, and bewildering artifact. The mechanism is a ghost in the machine of history, a reminder that the line between genius and oblivion is perilously thin. Imagine the master craftsman hunched over his bench in Alexandria or Rhodes. The smell of hot metal and oil, the rhythmic tap of the hammer, the intense focus required to file bronze teeth down to tolerances of a fraction of a millimeter. He knew he was creating something revolutionary, something that mapped the heavens into a tangible mechanical form. Did he know that his greatest invention would be lost to the sea and misunderstood for 2 millennia? The tragedy is not just the loss of the device, but the loss of the entire scientific tradition it represented. The mechanism is a three-dimensional representation of abstract astronomical models, suggesting that the integration of theoretical science and practical engineering was far more advanced in the Hellenistic world than previously believed. It forces us to reconsider the entire timeline of mechanical engineering and astronomical observation. The implications ripple back to the Deakin spheres. If the Greeks could master micro-precision for calculation, could the Deakins have mastered macro-precision for their geometric forms using some lost methodology, perhaps involving sonic vibration or chemical dissolution, rather than crude grinding? The idea that ancient civilizations were not just superstitious but deeply scientific, possessing practical applications of complex theory, is the thread tying these anomalies together. They challenge the linear progression narrative and hint at cycles of rise, collapse, and forgotten mastery. If history were a smooth river, these discoveries would be jagged rocks tearing at the hull of our consensus ship. Instead, we try to navigate around them, pretending they don't exist, labeling them unsolved mysteries rather than paradigm shifts. We have now established that civilization began earlier, Göbekli Tepe, that advanced technology existed, Baghdad Battery, Antikythera, and that global geographical knowledge was present, Piri Reis map. The stage is set for the most controversial and challenging discoveries, those that fundamentally challenge the chronology of life on Earth itself. Before we move into a realm that crosses over from history into paleontology and mythology, take a moment to absorb the weight of these existing anomalies. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this moved you. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você. Então fortalece esse conteúdo, curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver isso. We now turn to a set of artifacts so profoundly challenging to the established scientific consensus that they are often banished to the realm of fraud, fringe theory, or intellectual heresy. This is the collection of over 33,000 ceramic figures discovered in Acámbaro, Guanajuato, Mexico, starting in 1944. These are the Acámbaro figures. The story begins not with a trained archaeologist, but with a dedicated amateur collector, Waldemar Hulsrud, a German hardware merchant living in Acámbaro. Hulsrud, having a keen interest in local archaeology, hired a local farmer, Odilon Tinajero, to dig up artifacts near the Cerro del Toro, Bull Hill. What Tinajero began unearthing was unlike anything found in established Mesoamerican archaeology. The sheer volume of the collection is staggering, tens of thousands of clay figures, ranging in size from a few inches to several feet tall. But the content is the true shockwave. Alongside expected depictions of pre-Columbian humans, dogs, and domestic scenes, Hulsrud's collection contained thousands of figures depicting creatures that should have been extinct for 65 million years. Dinosaurs. The figurines depict recognizable species: Stegosaurus, Tyrannosaurus rex, Iguanodon, long-necked sauropods, and various pterodactyls. Crucially, many of the depictions show humans interacting with these beasts, riding them, fighting them, or merely observing them in domestic scenes. For the scientific consensus, which dates the extinction of the dinosaurs long before the appearance of anatomically modern humans, this collection presents an insurmountable paradox. If the figures are genuinely ancient, they prove human and dinosaur coexistence, shattering the entire structure of paleontology and evolutionary history. If the figures are not genuine, they represent the largest, most elaborate, and persistent archaeological hoax in history. Hulsrud maintained that the figures were excavated from undisturbed strata, often buried deep and cemented by layers of hard-packed earth and cultural debris, indicating they were genuinely ancient. Initial dating attempts were contradictory. A key test occurred in the 1950s when dating using the controversial thermoluminescence method was attempted by labs in the US and the UK. While early tests were inconclusive, later thermoluminescence dating by laboratories in the 1970s and 1980s suggested dates ranging from 2500 BCE to 1500 BCE, a period firmly within the pre-Columbian epoch, but still millions of years too late for the subjects they depict. The arguments for authenticity are circumstantial but compelling. 1. The scale. Over 33,000 figures were found. Creating that many highly detailed, diverse figures requires decades of continuous labor, a vast infrastructure, and immense artistic variation, far beyond the capacity of a single family or small group of hoaxers operating in secret in the mid-20th century. 2. The style. The figures show significant variation in style and technique, consistent with a multi-generational cultural tradition, rather than the monolithic consistency of a modern forgery operation. 3. Contextual finds. The dinosaur figures were found alongside recognized pre-Columbian artifacts and human burials, suggesting they belonged to the same cultural horizon. The scientific establishment's rejection is absolute and fierce, based almost entirely on the catastrophic implications for paleontology. The primary arguments against the figures are: 1. Implausibility. The existence of dinosaurs in 2500 BCE is scientifically impossible, according to every established metric of dating and fossil evidence. 2. Knowledge. How could the ancient artists have known the correct anatomy of creatures like the iguanodon or brontosaurus, when those species were only reconstructed by Western paleontologists in the 19th and 20th centuries? Critics argue the depictions are based on modern comic book or museum reconstructions, meaning they must be 20th century creations. 3. Dating inconsistencies. Thermoluminescence dating, especially on baked clay, can be notoriously unreliable due to exposure to fire or other variables. Yet, counter-arguments to the knowledge claim exist. Some figures depict dinosaur anatomy that was incorrect according to 1940s paleontology, but which was later corrected by subsequent fossil discoveries. For instance, some figures depict features like dermal plates or posture that were only scientifically confirmed decades after Julsrud's discovery. If they were forgeries, how did the hoaxers accurately predict future paleontological findings? Imagine running your fingers over the cool, rough texture of the Acambaro clay. You hold a small figurine of a long-necked dinosaur, its head gently resting against a human figure. The clay feels ancient, possessing that unmistakable low-fired quality of genuine indigenous pottery. The weight of the object is physical, but the weight of its implication is unbearable. The figures force a choice. Either centuries of scientific consensus regarding the history of life is entirely wrong, or an unprecedented, massive and expensive hoax was perpetrated with no discernible economic motive, maintained by numerous individuals over decades, and executed with an internal consistency that rivals authentic archaeological sites. For many, the sheer scale of the deception required to maintain the hoax strains credibility far more than the possibility of a lost human civilization existing alongside relic dinosaur populations after some cataclysm. The rejection of Acambaro is not merely a scientific disagreement, it is an act of self-preservation by the academic community. To accept the Acambaro figures means questioning the uniformity of the fossil record, the efficacy of standard dating techniques, and the very foundation of evolutionary theory as currently taught. This would be a collapse far greater than the challenge posed by Göbekli Tepe. The figures are silent witnesses to a historical possibility we are terrified to admit, that written history, starting with a few thousand years, is entirely inadequate to capture the true span of human existence and coexistence with other species. They represent the final, most direct confrontation with the possibility of deep time, human interaction with epochs we consider mythical. The controversy itself highlights the intense pressure exerted by scientific dogma. Why is it easier for the establishment to believe in a 33,000-piece hoax executed by an impoverished Mexican community than to accept a sliver of doubt about the timeline of the KT boundary? The answer is that the historical narrative is a powerful social tool, and any discovery that threatens its coherence is treated not as evidence, but as an existential threat. The detailed artistry of the figures is astounding. Observe the musculature, the posture, the specific crests and frills of the dinosaurs, details that required either first-hand observation or an inherited artistic tradition that somehow preserved the images of creatures long gone. The complexity of the collection speaks of a profound, sustained cultural relationship with these creatures, whether real or mythological. The sheer density of the find, localized around one small hill, suggests that this spot was of significant cultural or religious importance. We see a Stegosaurus figurine with its characteristic plates, a creature known only to modern science through its fossilized remains. Yet here it is, rendered in soft, ancient clay, interacting with a human figure dressed in simple garb. This single object encapsulates the entire historical contradiction. It is a visual scream against the accepted timeline. The atmosphere during the excavation must have been electric, a slow, terrifying realization dawning on Julsrud that he was unearthing something impossible. the moist, heavy earth clinging to the figures, the smell of damp soil and ancient history. Each figure pulled from the ground represented another nail in the coffin of historical certainty. If we link the Acambaro anomaly back to Göbekli Tepe, a frightening scenario emerges. A civilization, or multiple contemporary ones, existing far earlier than we believe, potentially surviving a global cataclysm, perhaps the one that destroyed the dinosaurs, or perhaps a later massive extinction event. The survivors, clinging to the fragments of their knowledge, passed down these stories, these images, this impossible history, which eventually manifested as the Acambaro figures. The figures are a form of historical record preserved in art, bypassing the need for perishable scrolls or easily destroyed monuments. They are the mythological echoes of a truth too big for standard history to contain. Returning briefly to the Diki spheres, imagine one of the largest, placed prominently on a pedestal. Its surface, smooth and cool to the touch, reflects the intense tropical light. We know its shape is nearly perfect, but consider the implication of the material itself. Granodiorite is incredibly difficult to work. If the Diki's culture did not use advanced tools, they must have employed an amount of sustained, dedicated labor that suggests a highly effective, perhaps coercive, social structure. The sheer difficulty of the task elevates the spheres beyond mere art into a demonstration of power. The power of the ruling elite to command impossible labor for abstract purposes. They serve as silent, geometric monuments to a culture that valued perfection and order above all else, perhaps reflecting a cosmological view based on geometry that is now completely lost to us. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this moved you. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você. Então, fortalece esse conteúdo, curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver isso. We now turn our attention from land-based anomalies to submerged mysteries, delving into the realm of marine archaeology. Our focus shifts to the Western Pacific, specifically off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni. This is the location of the Yonaguni Monument, a controversial submerged structure that some believe is evidence of a massive, lost island civilization. Perhaps the real-world inspiration for the myth of Atlantis. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver, Kihachiro Aratake, the structure is a colossal submerged formation, approximately 500 feet long, 130 feet wide, and 90 feet tall. At first glance, it appears to be a massive step pyramid structure, composed of impossibly straight lines, sharp corners, terraces, and 90-degree angles. The intense controversy surrounding Yonaguni revolves around a single, fundamental question. Is this structure a natural geological formation, or is it an artificial monument sculpted by human hands? Geologists advocating for the natural explanation point to the sandstone composition of the monument, arguing that the rectangular shapes, parallel lines, and sheer vertical cliffs are the result of natural faulting, erosion patterns, and seismic activity over millennia. The rock is known to cleave naturally in geometric patterns, an effect called jointing. However, the arguments for artifice are compelling and based on observation by geologists, marine archaeologists, and seismologists, including figures like Professor Masaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus. Proponents of the artificial theory highlight several critical features. 1. Right angles and symmetry. The structure features perfectly formed right-angle corners, straight terraces, and precise symmetry that seems highly unlikely to occur randomly in nature on such a large scale. 2. Quarry marks and cut walls. Observations include clear evidence of tool marks, wedge-shaped holes suggestive of quarrying, and a massive rock wall, a megalithic feature that seems to reinforce the structure. 3. Specific features. The monument includes what appear to be steps, a massive triangular pool, and distinctive relief carvings that resemble animals and faces, suggestive of human intervention and sculpting. If the Yonaguni structure is indeed man-made, the date of its construction is staggering. The structure currently rests approximately 80 feet beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Due to globally tracked sea level rises, the last time this landmass would have been above water was during the end of the last ice age, approximately 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This dating places Yonaguni squarely in the same epoch as Göbekli Tepe. If the structure is artificial, it means that at the time when mainstream history insists humanity was just beginning to emerge from nomadic hunter-gatherer existence, there was a maritime civilization in the Pacific capable of monumental stone construction, perhaps operating on a scale comparable to or even exceeding the pyramids of Giza. The challenge to history is immense. It forces us to acknowledge a powerful, technologically capable civilization that was completely swallowed by the rising oceans at the end of the Pleistocene epoch. This fits precisely the mythological narratives of global floods and sunken continents, narratives often dismissed as pure fantasy. Imagine diving into the clear, warm waters of Yonaguni. The massive stone structure rises out of the blue abyss, silent and imposing. The scale is overwhelming. As you swim along one of the perfectly straight horizontal terraces, running your hand along the rough yet clearly defined edge, the idea that this is solely the work of random erosion becomes incredibly difficult to sustain. The sensation is one of profound encounter with a lost world. The Yonaguni monument, if artificial, represents an unprecedented level of engineering knowledge applied to monumental coastal architecture. It speaks of a people who were masters of the sea, capable of moving and shaping colossal amounts of stone, and perhaps, crucially, aware of the impending massive sea level changes that would eventually submerge their work. Like Göbekli Tepe, its existence hints at a global catastrophe that reset human civilization. The rapid melting of ice sheets around 11,000 to 9,000 BCE would have dramatically altered coastlines worldwide, submerging any coastal civilizations, which are often the most advanced, and wiping out the majority of their physical records. The Yonaguni structure, therefore, is not just a building, it is a timestamp of a historical end. It proves that there were highly organized societies thriving globally before the Younger Dryas event, a period of intense, rapid climate change, and suggests that the survivors of this cataclysm were responsible for spreading the fragments of knowledge that later emerged in isolated pockets across the globe: Egypt, Sumer, perhaps even the sources for Piri Reis. The established academic consensus on Yonaguni remains one of cautious geological dismissal, primarily because accepting it requires such a radical overhaul of human chronology. It is safer to conclude natural formation than to admit the possibility of deep human history, a history that predates our current known cycles of recorded time. Consider the complexity of the Yonaguni rock. The vertical faces are sheer, with horizontal layering that suggests the stonemasons were utilizing the natural cleavage points in the sandstone, but enhancing them, perfecting the angles, and carving specific features. The steps often appear oversized, designed for colossal beings or ritualistic display, rather than mere practical ascent. The ocean, cold and vast, serves as the ultimate preservation medium, but also the ultimate censor. It hides the supporting evidence, the villages, the harbors, the tools, the written records of the people who might have built this massive monument. We are left only with the haunting geometry of the structure itself, sitting silently beneath the waves, forcing us to question the entire official narrative of the last 12,000 years. We have now examined 5 anomalies, each challenging a core tenet of accepted history. 1. Göbekli Tepe challenges the start date of civilization and settled life. 2. Baghdad battery and Antikythera mechanism challenge the complexity and timeline of ancient technology. 3. Piri Reis map challenges the scope of ancient geographical knowledge. 4. Acambaro figures challenges the timeline of life on Earth, human-dinosaur coexistence. 5. Yonaguni Monument challenges the existence of massive, sophisticated precursor civilizations swallowed by rising sea levels. The confluence of these pieces of evidence is becoming overwhelming. They suggest not just isolated genius, but a widespread, globally interconnected wave of intellectual and technological competence that flourished, collapsed, and then was almost entirely forgotten. The tension in this investigation must now focus on the nature of lost information itself. How did the ancients record their most crucial knowledge, and what happens when those records are lost to the sands of time or buried beneath the oceans? The final two discoveries focus entirely on systems of communication that have defied all modern attempts at decipherment. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this moved you. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você. Então fortalece esse conteúdo, curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver isso. We move now from physical structures and geographical knowledge to the ultimate intellectual anomaly, a book that no one can read. This is the Voynich manuscript, a codex written in an unknown script and an unknown language, illustrated with bizarre, fantastical diagrams and dating back roughly to the early 15th century. Named after Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish book dealer who acquired it in 1912, the manuscript is a historical and cryptographic puzzle that has confounded the greatest minds in code breaking for over a century, including US military cryptographers from both world wars and specialists from the NSA. The manuscript itself is roughly 240 pages of vellum, written in ink that chemical analysis confirms is consistent with 15th century techniques. The text flows naturally, written by a seemingly confident hand, suggesting the author was not laboring over a complex cipher, but writing fluently in an established, if unknown, script. The script, often called Voynichese, has approximately 20 to 30 unique characters, but its structure does not align with any known Western or Eastern European alphabet. The linguistic structure of the text is equally bizarre. It lacks the short, high-frequency words common in most languages, yet certain characters appear only at the beginning of words, and others only in the middle or end. The statistical analysis of word length and frequency suggests it is not a random jumble of letters, but possesses the highly structured patterns of a true, functioning language. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the Voynich manuscript is its illustrations, which provide clues, yet simultaneously deepen the mystery. The images are broadly categorized into sections. 1. Herbal section, depicting plants that do not correspond to any known botanical species on Earth, sometimes blending features in ways that defy natural classification. 2. Astronomical section, featuring cosmological diagrams, suns, moons, and stars, often intertwined with naked female figures or complex geometric arrangements. 3. Biological section, the most famous section, featuring strange, elaborate systems of plumbing, bathing, and interconnection, often involving small, intertwined female figures bathing in green liquid. These defy simple interpretation as medical or hygienic practices. 4. Pharmaceutical section, illustrations of jars and root diagrams, likely related to compounds or medicinal preparations. 5. Recipes section, pages of dense text in the unknown script, possibly the actual recipes or instructions. The illustrations, combined with the impenetrable text, suggest the manuscript contains highly specialized, complex knowledge, perhaps medicinal, alchemical, or astronomical, that was deemed so valuable or dangerous that it had to be encoded in a unique, untranslatable format. For decades, the standard assumption was that the Voynich manuscript was a cipher, an existing language, like Latin or Old German, disguised by a complex substitution or transposition code. However, sophisticated modern computer analysis has failed to break the code. The text exhibits features that defy standard cryptographic methods, leading many to the conclusion that 1. It is a sophisticated, unique encoding of an extinct language, or 2. It is a massive, elaborate and brilliant hoax designed to be meaningless, or 3. It is written in a true, unknown, constructed language, an a priori language, specifically created for the purpose of the book. If the third option is true, the sheer intellectual effort required to invent an entire functional language, complete with its own grammar, syntax and statistical consistency, simply to write a medieval medical treatise, is astounding. This suggests the author was a genius, operating on a level of linguistic abstraction far ahead of his time. The connection to our theme of ancient discoveries lies in the possibility that the Voynich manuscript is the surviving fragment of an ancient, pre-cataclysmic language and knowledge system that managed to survive the historical collapse. Perhaps the unknown plants and astronomical systems are not fictitious but descriptive, describing flora that existed before the last ice age or astronomical events that occurred thousands of years ago, preserved through secret societies or intellectual lineages. If the script is genuinely a lost language, it demonstrates the vulnerability of linguistic knowledge. Unlike stones, language can be wiped out entirely, leaving only these silent, beautiful, and utterly frustrating relics. The manuscript is a physical reminder that not all knowledge is lost through destruction. Sometimes it is simply rendered inaccessible. Imagine the smell of the vellum, dry and slightly musty, the pages brittle with age. You turn the pages slowly, gazing at the bizarre, intricate drawings, the tiny entwined women in the green pools, the detailed yet impossible flora. The sense of profound intellectual alienation is intense. You are holding a book written by a human mind, yet you cannot access a single idea within it. It is the ultimate historical barrier. If the Voynich manuscript is a lengthy, complex book written in an unknown language, the next discovery is a compact, dense artifact that embodies the same cryptographic mystery, but pushes the timeline back even further. We travel to the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete, to the Phaistos disk. Discovered in 1908 by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier at the Minoan palace site of Phaistos, the disk is a flat, circular piece of fired clay, approximately 6 inches in diameter. Both sides are covered with a spiral arrangement of stamped symbols. The symbols on the Phaistos disk are its defining feature. There are 241 impressions of 45 distinct signs. These symbols were pressed into the soft clay using individual seals or types, a technique that makes the Phaistos disk a unique anomaly in the history of writing. It is, arguably, the earliest known example of a document produced by movable type, predating Gutenberg's printing press by nearly 3,000 years. The symbols themselves depict recognizable objects, human figures, animals, plants, tools, and geometric shapes. They are clearly pictographic or ideographic. Like the Voynich manuscript, the signs do not correspond to any known Minoan script, like Linear A or Linear B. The disk is dated to the Middle or Late Minoan Bronze Age, around 1700 BCE. The problem is its isolation. No other object has ever been found with this specific script or using this specific movable type technology. It appears as a sudden, singular invention without context or continuation. This creates an intense debate. Was the disk an import from a foreign land? Was it a unique experimental prototype of a new communication technology that failed to catch on? Or was it a specialized religious or ceremonial text, deliberately encoded or written in a symbolic language known only to an elite few? Decipherment attempts have been numerous and dramatic, ranging from proposals that it is an ancient prayer or legal document, to claims that it contains astronomical data or even an early form of phonetic text. None of these attempts have achieved universal scholarly acceptance, and the disk remains fundamentally untranslated. Imagine holding the replica of the disc, feeling the smooth, cool texture of the fired clay. The complexity of the symbols, arranged in their tight spiral, gives a dizzying impression of profound, dense information locked away. The sheer effort to create 45 separate stamps for this one message speaks volumes about the importance of the content, or the technology itself. The mystery of the Phaistos disc, like the Voynich manuscript, is not one of technology, but one of linguistic isolation. It demonstrates how easily an entire method of writing, or even an entire language, can be lost, leaving behind only one enigmatic artifact. We have now traveled across time and space, from 12,000-year-old monuments to 20th-century ceramic figures, collecting 7 distinct anomalies that refuse to fit into the conventional historical framework. 1. Göbekli Tepe, 9600 BCE, shatters the timeline of civilization. 2. Baghdad Battery, 150 BCE, suggests lost electrical knowledge. 3. Antikythera mechanism, 150 BCE, proves lost mastery of precision engineering. 4. Piri Reis map, 1513 CE, based on older sources, suggests lost global geographical knowledge. 5. Decrease spheres, 700 1530 CE, demonstrates impossible geometric perfection. 6. Acambaro figures, possible 2500 BCE, challenges the timeline of life, human-dinosaur coexistence. 7. Voynich manuscript and Phaistos disc, 1700 BCE, 15th century CE, represents lost languages and information technology. The question is no longer whether history is incomplete, but rather, how did we lose so much? What happened to the libraries, the workshops, the navigational centers, and the linguistic knowledge that supported these 7 islands of genius? The answer, hinted at by the synchronous dating of Yonaguni and Göbekli Tepe, is a global cataclysm. The Younger Dryas period, spanning roughly 10,800 to 9,600 BCE, represents a dramatic and sudden return to near-glacial conditions, immediately followed by rapid warming and massive sea level rise, the meltwater pulse 1b. This event aligns precisely with the dating of Göbekli Tepe, built just before the event, and Yonaguni, submerged by the resulting sea level rise. If there was a global civilization, advanced, maritime, and technologically sophisticated, existing before 12,000 years ago, this cataclysmic period would have been the mechanism for its eradication. Coastlines were flooded, inland areas were subjected to extreme climate shifts, and the infrastructure supporting complex knowledge would have been destroyed. The survivors, the shattered remnants of this precursor culture, would have been scattered across the globe, bringing with them only the fragments of their knowledge. The geometry that led to the Decrease spheres, the cartography that survived in the libraries Piri Reis consulted, the technological theory that emerged as the Baghdad Battery. The Acambaro figures then become a profound mythological memory, a folk history of a time before the catastrophe when the world was radically different. If you arrived here without pausing, it's because this moved you. Se você chegou até aqui sem pausar, é porque isso mexeu com você. Então, fortalece esse conteúdo. Curte agora e manda para alguém que precisa ver isso. We must return to the logistical reality of these structures to fully appreciate the depth of the lost knowledge. Consider again the sheer monumental scale of Göbekli Tepe. It's not just the weight of the pillars, but the uniformity of the construction and the consistent application of ritualistic symbolism across multiple enclosures. This implies a highly centralized religious and administrative body guiding the construction over hundreds of years. Imagine the organizational charts, the quarry management teams, the seasonal provisioning schedules, all executed by people whom established history labels as Neolithic hunter-gatherers. The accepted model suggests that agriculture was required to produce the caloric surplus necessary to sustain this type of specialized, non-productive labor. Göbekli Tepe refutes this. The specialization came first. The demand for food drove the need for agricultural refinement. The scent of dry Turkish soil and the sound of wind whipping past the monumental stones carry the silent argument. These were not simple people. They were inheritors, or perhaps originators, of an organizational genius that was subsequently lost. The precise carving techniques used on the stone are also a mystery. How did they achieve such detailed bas-reliefs on hard limestone without sophisticated metal tools? The answers usually provided, flint and obsidian implements, suggest a level of painstaking labor so intense it borders on the psychologically impossible for the scale achieved. This forces us to speculate on the potential use of unknown chemical agents to soften the rock, or perhaps sonic methods of cutting, technology we certainly do not associate with the 10th millennium BCE. The Piri race map is a testament not just to geographical knowledge, but to supreme navigational skill. To map Antarctica accurately before it was covered in ice, the original cartographers must have possessed 1. Precise longitude, determination, a method superior to all known historical methods until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. Did they use highly accurate mechanical clocks, like a precursor to the Antikythera mechanism, or perhaps celestial navigation involving observations we have forgotten? 2. Global reach. This implies ocean-crossing vessels, capable of sustained long-distance voyages, ships far superior to the simple triremes or sailing ships of the classical period. These lost vessels would have been the true backbone of the precursor civilization. 3. Surveying technology. Tools for precise triangulation and measurement over vast distances, perhaps utilizing principles of optics or physics we do not attribute to the ancient world. The Piri race map is a ghost of a golden age of navigation, an era when the entire globe was known, documented, and traversed. The tragedy is that this knowledge was so completely lost that later generations had to spend centuries painfully rediscovering the continents their predecessors had already mapped. The sense of intellectual loss is staggering. If the ancient world knew the shape of Antarctica, imagine what they knew about astronomy, medicine, or philosophy. We are standing on the beach, picking up smooth pebbles, unaware that just beneath the sand lies an entire mountain range of lost knowledge. The combined evidence of these 7 anomalies forces a single, radical conclusion: that history is cyclical, not linear. We are not constantly ascending the ladder of progress. We are repeating a pattern of development, climax, and catastrophic collapse. The primary function of the scientific consensus is to maintain order. The comfortable, linear progression from caveman to farmer, to Sumerian to Greek, to Roman to modern man provides a clear, digestible narrative of continuous improvement. The 7 discoveries shatter that comfort. They suggest that at least once, and perhaps multiple times, humanity achieved a level of sophistication, be it geometric, technological, or organizational, that was subsequently wiped out, resetting the clock. This collapse is likely tied to massive, sudden environmental shifts, such as the comet impact hypothesis associated with the Younger Dryas, which could have triggered the period of rapid cooling, massive flooding, and tectonic instability. If the planet itself reset, only the most robust, isolated, and specialized knowledge would survive. The Acambaro figures become not evidence of a local hoax, but the cultural debris of this massive reset. Memories of a time when the world was fundamentally different, clinging desperately to the collective consciousness of a scattered post-cataclysmic people. Why did the Baghdad battery and the Antikythera mechanism fail to launch an industrial revolution? Because the supporting structure, the universities, the workshops, the economic systems necessary for mass production, was either never established or was too fragile, too localized, to survive the inevitable collapse of an empire or a major climate event. Imagine the isolated genius who built the Antikythera mechanism. He was likely a lone star in a darkening sky, possessing knowledge derived from an obscure manuscript or a secret lineage. When he died, the knowledge died with him, leaving only the complex bronze gears as his cryptic legacy. The Diki spheres, being made of impervious stone, survived because their creators chose a medium resistant to the ravages of time, unlike the delicate vellum of the Voynich manuscript. They represent the lasting nature of physical dedication, even when the intellectual key is lost. The greatest discovery these artifacts offer is not what they tell us about the past, but what they tell us about our present. We are historically impoverished. We are the survivors of a colossal memory wipe, convinced of our own originality, yet constantly stumbling across the superior achievements of our forgotten ancestors. The feeling of uncertainty is now pervasive. The comfortable timeline has dissolved into a murky, challenging complexity. Every historical date, every technological attribution is now subject to intense scrutiny. What if the plants in the Voynich manuscript are the pharmacopoeia of the pre-Ice Age world? What if the geometry of the Diki spheres is based on a forgotten, advanced mathematical constant? This is the ultimate confrontation, accepting the possibility that everything we believe about our place in time is wrong. We stand at the edge of the known timeline, looking backward into a void filled with impossible objects and lost knowledge. The 7 discoveries, from the monumental silence of Göbekli Tepe to the cryptographic frustration of the Voynich manuscript, collectively prove that the story of humanity is far longer, stranger, and more volatile than the textbooks allow. The narrative arc of this lost history is clear. There was a highly capable precursor civilization, evidenced by Yonaguni and Piri race. It possessed advanced, specialized technology. Antikythera, Baghdad battery. It flourished before 10,000 BCE, Göbekli Tepe. It suffered a catastrophic collapse, Younger Dryas event. The scattered survivors maintained fragments of specialized knowledge, Diki spheres, Akambaro figures, Voynich, Phaistos scripts. Our current civilization is merely the latest cycle, recovering from an amnesia whose full extent we still refuse to confront. The most critical realization is that the artifacts we have explored are those that were lucky enough to survive. They survived fire, flood, neglect, and the continuous efforts of later cultures to repurpose or destroy them. How many more technologically advanced machines? How many more megalithic cities? How many more libraries of lost knowledge are still buried under the Antarctic ice, beneath the sands of the Gobi Desert, or entombed in the deepest trenches of the ocean? The exploration of these anomalies is not just a quest for historical facts, it is a desperate search for warnings. If history is cyclical, we must understand what caused the previous great collapse. Was it climate change? Was it technological hubris? Was it a combination of natural forces and societal fragility? The answers may lie in the unreadable scripts and the impossible geometry left behind. The final challenge is for the viewer. Will you continue to accept the comfortable narrative of linear history, or will you dare to look deeper at the accumulating evidence of a glorious, terrifying, and lost human past? These 7 discoveries are merely the tip of the submerged iceberg. They are invitations to rewrite the foundational story of humanity. If this content opened your mind, comment below. I reached the end. Se esse conteúdo abriu a sua mente, comenta aí, cheguei até o fim. Isso ajuda a entender quem realmente está buscando conhecimento além da superfície. Curte o vídeo, se inscreve agora no canal e ativa o sininho, porque os próximos episódios vão ainda mais fundo. E não sai sem clicar no próximo vídeo. Ele é a continuação dessa jornada. The silent stones of Göbekli Tepe still stand guard. The tiny gears of the Antikythera mechanism continue their slow, impossible rotation in the museum glass. The vast, unreadable pages of the Voynich manuscript hold their secrets close. The paradox remains. We know more about the deep cosmos than we know about the full timeline of our own species. The only thing truly certain is that the age of comfortable historical certainty is over. The past is not settled. It is merely waiting to be re-excavated, one impossible discovery at a time. The real history of humanity is still buried. What will we find when we finally dig deep enough?